I had barely settled into my wheelchair on the back lawn when my older brother Derek stepped up behind me at our big summer family reunion. Before I could process what was happening, his hands landed hard on the back of my chair, and he shoved with brutal force. My wheelchair tipped sideways. I crashed onto the warm grass, palms scraping against dry blades, helpless on the ground. "Quit faking it just to get everyone's attention," he barked loud enough for every relative within earshot to hear. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Cousins, aunts, and uncles all stood watching, many of them snickering, buying into the story Derek had spent 2 years spreading about me. None of them knew my neurologist, Dr. Miles Hale, was standing directly behind the group. He cleared his throat sharply and spoke 5 short words that shattered every illusion in that yard. "Her condition is permanent." Pain shot through my shoulders as I lay there on the grass. For 2 long years, I had lived with nerve damage from a severe injury. The partial loss of leg strength left me dependent on my wheelchair for most daily activities. I had gone through endless scans, physical therapy appointments, and painful testing. Yet to most of my family, I was nothing more than a manipulative person putting on a performance for sympathy. Derek had convinced nearly everyone. At every holiday, every get-together, he would drop little comments, hinting I could walk if I truly wanted to. Slowly but surely, he turned most of our relatives against me. I kept hoping they would see reason. I kept hoping my own family would trust my lived experience and trust my doctors. That afternoon, sprawled out on the lawn, surrounded by mocking laughter, that hope felt thin and the crowd went dead silent. The second Dr. Hale's words sank. A few relatives froze mid-laugh, their smiles sliding right off their faces. Derek's shoulders. He spun around to face the doctor, face flushed with anger. "Not. You have no business inserting yourself into our family affairs, Derek." He crossed his arms, stubborn, refusing to absorb what he had heard. My mother Carol took a hesitant step. Her eyes flicked between me on the ground and Dr. Hale, clear torn. My father Roger hung back, his jaw tight, unsure. No one rushed over to help me up away. That hurt more than the fall. Even after a medical professional woke up, my family still hesitated. Dr. Hale moved forward and nudged me, carefully helping me sit upright before adjusting my tipped-over wheelchair back. His voice stayed calm and professional, no trace of drama. "I am Elaine's treating oncologist. I have reviewed all her MRI results and supervised her rehabilitation. Her nerve damage cannot be reversed. He looked out across the gathered family. "It is dangerous for anyone to bear. She can suffer serious harm," Derek scoffed. He waved off the doctor's explanation as, "Doctors get wrong diagnoses all the time," he argued. "She's good at playing the victim. She can twist anyone." I pulled myself back into my wheelchair, my hands shaking. Hot tears stung my eyes, but I forced myself not to cry. Everyone. For years I had bent over backwards to keep the peace. I would laugh off cruel jokes. I would ignore sideways comments from relatives. I trying to earn their love. But after being pushed around for sport, after hearing my own family my suffering, some shifted. Some cousins shifted uncomfortably on their feet. A couple of distant aunts exchanged quiet, uncertain glances. Dad crept into the group, but Derek was down. He turned toward our parents and started arguing in a tone. Sat in my wheelchair, staring out at the family I had my whole life. The joyful reunion atmosphere was completely destroyed. I understood in that moment this would not end with one single statement from a doctor. The years of lies Derek had planted would not dissolve instantly. It was only just beginning, and I had no idea how far my own brother was willing if he was right. The awkward silence hung thick over the backyard, long after Dr. Hale finished speaking. The cheerful music from the patio speakers felt jarring and out of place, clashing with the tense, guilty energy rolling off every family member present. Relatives who'd been laughing and teasing mere seconds ago now stood frozen, avoiding eye contact, unsure how to recover from the public humiliation of their cruel mistake. Derek refused to let the moment die quietly, doubling down on his arrogance instead of acknowledging the truth laid out in front of him. He stepped forward, voice raised and defensive, determined to regain control of the family narrative he'd spent years building. "This is exactly what she wants," Derek announced to the crowd, gesturing sharply toward me. "She brings her doctor to a family reunion to ambush everyone and make us look terrible. She thrives on pity, and now she's using a medical professional to manipulate all of us." His words were bold and confident, designed to plant new doubt in the minds of relatives who'd already started questioning their judgment. He spun my trauma into a calculated scheme, painting me as the villain for finally proving my truth. I sat stiffly in my wheelchair, my scraped palms stinging and my chest tight with frustration. I had never intended to ambush anyone. Dr. Hale had only accompanied me to the reunion because I'd confessed my fear of facing my family alone. After years of their relentless mockery and disbelief, I'd begged for someone to back me up, to validate the constant pain I lived with every single day. I'd hoped a neutral medical expert would finally help them understand. I never imagined my own brother would twist that small act of support into another lie to demonize me. Dr. Hale did not flinch from Derek's aggressive tone. He stood firm, his voice steady and authoritative, cutting through my brother's frantic excuses. I did not come here to ambush anyone. I came to advocate for my patient, who has endured unnecessary public harassment and physical endangerment today. Elaine's diagnosis is not up for family debate. Her nerve damage is clinically verified, permanent, and severely limiting. Every comment dismissing her struggle is ignorant and harmful. The crowd shifted uncomfortably, many relatives visibly guilty and embarrassed. A few cousins quietly slipped away, unable to bear the awkward tension they'd helped create with their laughter. But my parents remained rooted in peace, their hesitation worse than outright anger. Instead of defending me or confronting Derek for his dangerous, cruel actions, they attempted to meet, desperate to smooth over the conflict and restore the fake peace of the reunion. "Let's all calm down," my mother pleaded. "This is a free day. No one needs to be hostile. Derek, apologize for pushing her, and Elaine, let's just move." Her words cut deeper than Derek's shove ever could. She treated my physical injury, public humiliation, and years of invalidation like a petty sibling argument that could be fixed with a quick apology and forced. My father nodded in agreement, his expression blank, choosing family harmony over his daughter's safety and dignity. In that moment, I realized the pain. My family valued comfort and false unity far more than truth. My pain, or my being. Derek huffed out a bitter, insincere apology, his tone dripping resentment. "I'm sorry, Belle," muttered, refusing to take responsibility for his deliberate choice. He immediately followed it with another passive grab. "But if you stopped overreacting and seeking condescension, none of this." It was clear he felt remorse, guilt, and no willingness to change his perspective. As the after dragged on, the reunion never returned to its former warmth. Conversations were forced. Relatives avoided entirely, and Derek continued bad-mouthing me in hushed groups. I overheard him telling Uncle that I'd tricked the doctor, that I'd exaggerated symptoms in sympathy, and that I'd always been overly dramatic. He was already rebuilding his narrative, erasing the doctor's proof to keep. By sunset, I was emotionally and exhausted. Dr. Hale helped me pack my things, quietly offering to drive me home so I wouldn't have to rely on anyone in my toxic family. As I wheeled toward the gate, I glanced back at my family laugh without me, acting as if they hadn't just destroyed my last hope of being seen and loved truthfully. I knew this wasn't the end. Derek's obsession with proving me alive was far from over, and I had a sinking feeling he was already planning something far worse to take back control of the family's opinion. The day after the disastrous family reunion, I woke up sore and drained, both physically and emotionally. My palms were still raw from scraping against the grass, and my shoulders ached from the brutal fall Derek had forced on me. But the pain lingering deepest inside me was not physical. It was the quiet, crushing disappointment of realizing my own family would never choose my truth over their comfortable lies. After years of bending, forgiving, and shrinking myself to keep the peace, I finally decided I was done being the quiet, compliant sister everyone found easy to dismiss. My phone began buzzing nonstop by mid-morning, flooded with group chat messages from our extended family. Curious aunts and distant cousins were rehashing the reunion incident, and Derek had wasted no time spinning a brand new false narrative. He claimed I'd ambushed the entire family by bringing my doctor unannounced, that I'd staged the fall to gain sympathy, and that I'd deliberately ruined their perfect annual gathering for selfish attention. He twisted Dr. Hale's professional testimony into biased favoritism, lying that the doctor was simply loyal to me and willing to skew facts to make me look innocent. I scrolled through the messages with a heavy heart, watching relatives blindly take Derek's side. Many commented that I'd always been sensitive and dramatic, that I'd never gotten over living in my brother's shadow, and that I owed the family a sincere apology for causing conflict. Not a single person acknowledged my injuries, my permanent condition, or the public humiliation I'd endured. Not one person questioned why Derek had felt justified shoving a disabled woman out of her wheelchair in front of everyone. Minutes later, my parents called together, their tone tired and frustrated instead of apologetic. They begged me to let it go and stop holding the reunion incident over Derek's. They insisted sibling fights were normal, that families had to forgive and move on, and that I was being stubborn for refusing to accept his half-hearted apology. They even suggested I stop bringing my doctor to family events, claiming it only fueled tension and made everyone uncomfortable. Their words were the final crack in the fragile hope I'd clung to for years. I'd spent my whole adult life trying to prove my pain was, trying to earn their belief and compassion. Yet they still saw my survival and self-defense as trouble. For the first time in my life, I refused to apologize, refused to back down, and refused to smooth things over for their convenience. I spoke calmly but firmly, no longer begging for their understanding. I am not causing the conflict, I told them silly. Derek put me, lying about my permanent disability, and convincing everyone to mock my suffering is the cause. I do not owe anyone forgiveness for being injured and humiliated in public. I do not owe anyone peace at the cost of my... My parents fell silent, clearly unused to me standing around. They'd always known me as the daughter who yielded, who apologized, who prioritized family harmony over her own. Later that afternoon, Dr. Hale checked in with me, concerned about my mental state after the... He gently warned me that continued denial and harassment from my family was emotionally damaging and physically... He reminded me that my nerve damage made me far more susceptible to severe injury from even small falls, and that Derek's reckless actions were never harmless. He offered to compile my full medical records, official MRI reports, and physical therapy documentation to end the endless speculation. I agreed without... I was no longer fighting for attention or family affection. I was fighting to defend myself against relentless slander and endangerment. I saved every false comment from the family group chat, screenshotting Derek's lies and every relative's judgment. For years, I'd avoided conflict to keep happy, but that passive choice had only let everyone hurt me repeatedly without... This time, I would meet their ignorance and cruelty with That night, Derek sent me a cold, aggressive text. He told me to drop the issue permanently, accused me of poisoning the family against him, and threatened to cut me off from all future family gatherings if I continued. As I stayed, I felt the last thread of sibling loyalty fray in me. He was ready to erase me from the family entirely rather than he was wrong. I knew then that my quiet counterattack with medical proof would not just lies. It would ignite the biggest family battle our house seen. I spent the entire night reviewing the screenshots I'd saved, rereading every cruel comment and false accusation my brother and relatives had thrown at me. For years, I'd naively believed that clear, undeniable proof would fix everything. I thought if I finally laid out my official medical records, MRI scans, and doctor's statements, my family would snap out of their delusion, apologize sincerely, and finally see the truth of what I lived through every day. I clung to that hope, convinced my family's hatred was rooted in ignorance, not deliberate cruelty. The next morning, I compiled every document Dr. Hale had sent me. I organized my official diagnosis, years of therapy logs, and clinical notes detailing my permanent nerve damage, making sure every piece of evidence was clear, professional, and impossible to dismiss. I planned to post the full file in our family group chat, believing this would end Derek's toxic rumors once and for all. In my flawed judgment, I thought my parents and extended family would side with medical fact over my brother's baseless opinions. Before I could post anything, my parents called again, their tone sharper and more frustrated than before. They begged me not to share any medical records publicly, insisting I was overreacting and blowing a small family incident out of proportion. They pleaded that exposing private medical information would embarrass Derek, damage family unity, and create permanent rifts that could never be repaired. They asked me to trust them, promising they would talk to Derek privately and make him stop spreading lies about me. Desperate to salvage what little was left of our family bond, I made the biggest mistake of the entire conflict. I trusted them. I held back my evidence, deleted the drafted post, and agreed to let my parents handle the situation behind closed doors. I told myself that blood was thicker than bitterness, that my parents loved me deep down, and that they would finally defend their disabled daughter. I set aside months of justified anger and years of betrayal, choosing hope over self-preservation one last time. Their promise was empty. Within hours, I learned they had not confronted Derek. Instead, they'd met with him privately, listened only to his version of the story, and agreed entirely with his narrative. They told Derek I was being irrational, attention-seeking, and unforgiving, blaming me for stirring up drama after a harmless reunion act. They comforted him, validated his false anger, and even apologized to him on my behalf, completely erasing the harm he'd caused. Derek grew bolder after gaining our parents' full support. He returned to the family group chat and doubled down on his accusations, claiming our parents had finally seen through my... He told everyone I was manipulating my medical condition to gain sympathy, that I was punishing the family for no one, and that I'd threatened to ruin everyone's peace out of petty resentment. With my parents silently by him, every remaining doubt in the family, they all chose to believe I was... The backlash against me was instantaneous. Relatives who'd hesitated to pick sides now flooded the chat with judgmental They called me bitter, dramatic, and claiming I was tearing the family apart for a trivial grudge. No one asked to see my proof. No one cared about my injuries or my permanent ability. They only cared about preserving their perfect, peaceful image, even if it meant sacrificing my dignity. I sat in my wheelchair in my quiet room, feeling more isolated than I'd ever in my life. I'd spent my whole life compromising, forgiving, and bending to keep my happy. And the one time I chose to stand up for myself, everyone. My own parents chose my abusive, lying brother over their daughter, proving that family loyalty meant nothing to them compared to comfort and conformity. My earlier judgment had been wrong. This was never a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate, collective choice to hurt and evening. I'd lost every single tentative ally Even the cousins who'd looked guilty at the reunion now ignored my messages and the last flicker of hope I'd held for my family died. I knew now that peaceful resolution was possible, and any further trust in my parents' empty promises would only lead. Didn't expect was that Derek and my parents were already planning one final devastating move to completely erase my truth from the family forever. After losing all family support and realizing my parents had betrayed my trust completely, I stopped waiting for someone to save me. I stopped hoping for apologies, understanding, or even basic kindness from the people who were supposed to protect me. For 2 full days, I went radio silent in every family group chat, ignoring every passive-aggressive message and judgmental text sent my way. I no longer wasted energy defending myself to people who refused to listen, and instead focused entirely on gathering every piece of evidence I needed to expose the full truth. I reconnected with Dr. Hale and asked him to compile an official, comprehensive medical summary tailored for third-party review. I wanted more than just basic diagnosis papers this time. I needed documented proof of my physical limitations, the permanence of my nerve damage, and explicit medical warnings about the dangers of being jostled or pushed in my wheelchair. Dr. Hale delivered within hours, sending a signed, stamped professional letter detailing my 2-year treatment history, failed recovery attempts, and clear clinical confirmation that my condition was irreversible and high risk. While I finalized my evidence, Derek continued his relentless smear campaign. He grew overconfident with my silence, taking my lack of response as confirmation that I had no leg to stand on. He told every family member privately that I was backing down, that my doctor's reunion statement was a lie, and that I would soon admit I'd been faking my disability all along. He even began planning a birthday dinner for our parents, telling everyone I would not be invited, framing it as a necessary choice to keep the family peaceful and happy. What no one knew was that I had uncovered a critical piece of hidden information that changed everything. An older cousin, Mia, who'd always been quietly kind to me, reached out through a private text. She'd stayed neutral during the reunion case and felt guilty for joining in the awkward silence after. She confessed that Derek had been poisoning the family's perception of me long before my injury. For years, he'd told relatives I was attention-seeking, emotionally unstable, and prone to fabricating struggles to steal the family spot. Mia revealed his scheme ran far deeper than I'd ever imagined. He'd spoken to our extended family before my reunion arrival, pre-warning everyone that I would stage a dramatic scene and manipulate my doctor for sympathy. He'd planted every seed of doubt that sprouted, turning the entire crowd against me before I even stepped foot on the. His cruel shove was not an impulsive outburst. It was a calculated move to his pre-planted narrative that I was faking weakness for her. Words shattered every last naive belief I'd held about brother. I'd always thought his hatred stemmed from jealousy or petty sibling, but this was premeditated, intentional. He'd spent years building a false version of me, just to make himself willing to destroy my reputation, endanger me, and isolate me from our entire family to feed his. Even after medical proof proved my condition real, he'd chosen to double down rather than admit his. Mia sent me screenshots of old group messages from past holidays, proving Derek's long history of spreading lies about me. She confirmed that our parents had known about his comment for months, but chose to overlook them, prioritizing family harmony over my safety and health. They'd watched him destroy my reputation slowly, nothing, allowing me to become the family's designated villain simply because I lived with a disability they refused to. Armed with both medical proof and first-hand witness evidence, I finally understood the full scope of conflict. This was never a one-time reunion fight or a simple mending. It was a years-long campaign of manipulation, built on lies, enabled by my parents' cowardice, and fueled by my brother's. I was not the problem. I was the victim of a carefully crafted betrayal. I no longer felt defeated. A sharp, clear resolve settled over me. I had endured years of mockery, isolation, endangerment, but I now held all the cards to dismantle Derek Good. Every secret, every hinted rumor, every cowardly choice my family had made was about to surface, and as I prepared to level truth, I knew the quiet, peaceful family facade they clung to would quietly, marking the start of my most dangerous and necessary yet. Armed with Mia's witness testimony and Dr. Hale's official medical documentation, I spent the evening compiling every piece of evidence into one complete timeline. I lined up Derek's years of old rumors, his pre-reunion smear campaign, his violent public shove, and my parents' consistent pattern of looking the other way. For the first time, I could see the full, unbroken picture of how my own family had slowly abandoned me. What stung most was realizing none of this happened by accident. It was a series of intentional choices, repeated over years, to favor comfort and false harmony over my truth. I decided to send the entire compiled timeline to my parents privately first. I did not post it in the family group chat or seek public humiliation. I simply wanted them to acknowledge what they'd allowed, to finally admit they'd failed me as my guardians. I included every screenshot from Mia, every signed medical note, and a calm, honest explanation of how their inaction had turned my entire family against me. I kept my tone steady and mature, free of anger or drama, hoping to trigger even a sliver of parental remorse. Their response broke me completely. Instead of apologizing or confronting Derek, they blamed me for digging up old drama and refusing to let the family heal. They claimed Mia was a troublemaker for stirring up tension, insisted Derek's words were just harmless sibling banter, and accused me of weaponizing my disability to destroy my brother's reputation. They flat out refused to read my medical file, saying they knew their children better than any doctor, and that I was simply too sensitive. Within hours, they forwarded my entire private message straight to Derek. They took my vulnerable, honest attempt at closure and handed it to the person hell-bent on destroying, giving him time to prepare a defense and twist my words again. It was the ultimate betrayal. My own parents were no longer neutral bystanders. They were active participants in Derek's campaign to erase me from the family. Derek exploded with rage the second he saw my evidence. He texted me aggressively, accusing me of conspiring with Mia to ruin his life, calling me a liar, a troublemaker, and a disgrace to the family. He doubled down on every lie, claiming I'd bribed my doctor for fake paperwork and manipulated Mia out of jealousy. He threatened to cut off all family ties permanently and vowed to make every relative choose sides once and for all. True to his word, Derek posted a long, dramatic paragraph in the main family group chat, painting himself as the victim of my lifelong obsession. He framed me as a bitter, vengeful sister who fabricated illness and drama to destroy his reputation. He omitted every piece of proof, ignored his violent shove at the reunion, and spun my quiet attempt at closure as a malicious. Without hesitation, nearly every family member sided with him, flooding the chat with messages condemning me for tearing the family. Mia faced immediate backlash for multiple aunts messaged her privately, scolding her for meddling in family business and forcing her to apologize for lying about. Intimidated and outed, Mia stood back, messaging me quietly that she could not keep defending me without being ostracized. She was forced into me, leaving me completely alone with no remaining allies in the entire. I sat alone in my quiet room, my wheelchair steadied beneath me, as every family bond I'd ever cherished crumbled to dust. I had no parents to turn to, no sibling trust, no relatives to support me. For years I'd avoided conflict, swallowed pain, and begged for their love and acceptance. I'd clung to the hope that blood would always prevail, that family would eventually choose kindness. In that moment, I finally accepted the truth. My family, they loved the easy, drama-free version of life I'd allowed to live. They hated the real, disabled, hurting me, who refused to stay silent. Tears fell silently to my cheeks, but they were not tears. They were tears of no release. I grieved the family I'd wanted so long, the parents who protected me, and the brother who chose cruelty over kinship. Once my grief faded, a cold, unshakable resolve settled in my chest. I would no longer beg for love I would never receive. I would no longer shrink to make others comfortable. I had lost every external support system, but in that empty, lonely low point, I would fight for myself, for my truth, for my dignity, no matter what my family tried from me next. After fully accepting that my family would never stand by my truth, I stopped grieving the relationship I'd spent decades trying to save. There was no more sadness, no more futile hope, no more quiet begging for someone to finally believe me. Grief had burned itself out, leaving only clear, unbreakable resolve. I was done shrinking myself to fit their comfortable lies, done apologizing for my disability, and done letting Derek's ego and my parents' cowardice dictate my worth. If they wanted a fight, I would give them one. A fair, evidence-based fight they could not lie their way out of. I spent the entire night restructuring every piece of evidence I owned. I organized Dr. Hale's official diagnosis letters, stamped MRI scan summaries, physical therapy progress logs, and clinical risk assessments that explicitly detailed the danger of jostling or pushing my wheelchair. I compiled every screenshot of Derek's years-long smear campaign, from old holiday group chats to his post-reunion rants. I saved Mia's private testimonial and timeline of his premeditated lies, cross-referencing every false claim with concrete proof to dismantle it completely. This was no longer emotional drama. It was a documented case of familial harassment and deliberate deception. I knew exactly how my family operated. They thrived on incomplete stories and group pressure, hiding their cruelty behind the mask of keeping the peace. They dismissed my words as bitter sibling conflict, but they could not dismiss official medical documentation from a licensed neurologist. They could not erase years of recorded lies. I decided my final post to the family group chat would be calm, factual, and unemotional. No yelling, no accusations, no desperate pleas for sympathy. Just unshakable truth laid out for every single relative to see. Early the next morning, I posted my compiled evidence pack. I opened with a short, straightforward statement that stripped away every excuse they'd clung. For 2 years, I have endured public mockery, false accusations of faking my disability, and endangerment at family events. My permanent nerve damage is clinically varied, irreversible, and high risk for severe injury with physical impact. Every claim that I am pretending is a deliberate, untrue rumor started and sustained by. Beneath the statement, I attached every formal document and timestamped. The family group chat went dead silent for over. No one posted jokes, no one shared casual updates, and no one rushed to defend Derek like they all. Relatives who'd blindly mocked me days before were forced to confront the reality of their cruelty. The cold, professional medical paperwork left no room for interpretation. My condition was real. My pain. Derek's violent shove and their laughter had been directed at a disabled family member they'd all willfully gaslighted. When Derek finally ended, his usual confident arrogance gone, replaced by frantic defense panic. He did not address a single piece of evidence. He did not dispute the doctor's official diagnosis or his own recorded lies. Instead, he resorted to petflexion, claiming I was overreacting, destroying family, and weaponizing medical records. His words were desperate, transparent to anyone willing to. My parents stepped in immediately to defend again. But their messages were shaky and unconvincing. They urged everyone to issue, insisting family unity mattered more than proving who was. Their attempt to shut down the conversation only exposed. They had no defense for enabling lies, no excuse for me, and no way to justify dismissing my very real physical limitation. For the first time ever, some family members refused to obey their call for silence. A few quiet relatives who'd always felt uneasy about the bullying finally spoke up. One aunt admitted she'd suspected the family had gone too far. A distant uncle said Derek's behavior had never been acceptable, regardless of any perceived. The unified front that had crushed me for years began to crack apart, and the tide of public family opinion slowly shifted. Derek could feel his control. He had built his reputation in the family on being the honest, reasonable sibling and painting me as a liar. Now his entire facade was crumbling. In a desperate attempt to regain power, he sent me a furious private message, swearing he would find a way to discredit my doctor, invalidate my records, and prove to everyone that I was still the villain in his twisted story. At his threat, faintly. I knew his last-ditch attempts would only make his hole deeper, and the full reversal of power was finally grasped. Humiliated and losing control of the family narrative, Derek wasted no time executing his final desperate play to redeem his ruined reputation. For years, his greatest leverage had been the family's blind trust and their willingness to prioritize harmony over truth. Now that his lies were exposed and relatives were starting to question him, he resorted to the only tactic he had left, digging up decades-old childhood memories to paint me as a lifelong liar and attention seeker. He abandoned all attempts to dispute my medical evidence and shifted the entire fight to emotional manipulation. Minutes after his hollow defense failed in the group chat, Derek posted a long, impassioned paragraph recounting petty childhood incidents, twisting harmless teenage behavior into proof of a lifelong pattern of deception. He recalled small moments where I'd exaggerated minor childhood injuries to get out of chores, framing those trivial memories as undeniable evidence that I was still faking my disability as an adult. He claimed I'd always been jealous of his closer bond with our parents, that I'd spent my whole life craving the family spotlight, and that my permanent diagnosis was just my biggest, most elaborate lie yet. It was a manipulative masterstroke, one designed to bypass hard medical facts and appeal purely to family sentiment. Many older relatives clung to those outdated childhood memories, allowing past trivial drama to override present-day medical reality. The unified support I'd just gained fractured instantly. Longtime family loyalists to Derek flocked back to his side, agreeing that my past minor attention-seeking habits must mean my current disability was fraudulent. The room split sharply down the middle, turning our entire extended family into two hostile factions. My parents publicly endorsed every word Derek wrote, posting heartfelt comments about knowing their children best and seeing through lifelong patterns. They ignored my adult trauma, my years of medical struggle, and the official documentation entirely, choosing outdated childhood biases over current, tangible truth. Their public stance confirmed what I'd long suspected. They would never choose me over Derek, no matter how much proof I provided. Their favoritism was permanent, unchanging, and unshakable. Yet this time, I did not crumble under the pressure. I had already grieved their rejection and accepted their bias fully. I knew exactly what Derek was doing, and I refused to let his emotional manipulation overshadow the factual evidence I'd laid out. Childhood mistakes did not erase permanent nerve damage. Teenage attention-seeking did not explain years of MRI scans, physical therapy, and chronic daily pain. I refused to let him rebrand my life-altering injury as a dramatic personality. I replied calmly and factually in the group chat. No emotion, no desperation. Every small childhood incident Derek referenced was typical teenage behavior, common to every sibling. None of it negates my verified adult medical diagnosis. I do not benefit from living in aware, from enduring chronic pain, or from limiting my lifestyle permanently. There is no tension, no reward, and no gain in struggling with a lifelong. I attached a brief addendum from Dahl, clarifying that behavioral history has no bearing on verifiable neurological. The remaining fair-minded relatives solidified their stance beside me once. The cousins and uncles and aunts who'd hesitated earlier now fully rejected Derek's childish reflection. They pointed out that his refusal to address the medical proof spoke volumes, and that dragging up decades-old sibling drama was a transparent attempt to avoid. The family's final battle lines were officially drawn, with no more neutral bystanders left to stay out of it. Derek grew enraged as his last viable tactic. He realized he could not win with facts, could not win with child stories, and could not win with parental favoritism. In his frustration, he sent me a terrifying private message that revealed his true, unhinged mindset. He stated plainly that he still believed I was faking, that my doc was wrong, and that he would never apologize for pushing me or for the years of abuse. He even hinted that he would confront me again at future events, convinced he could break my act. Reading his threat sent a cold, sharp. This was no longer a family misunderstanding, this was a obsession. My brother was willing to endanger my physical safety repeatedly just to protect his pride and there would be no peaceful resolution, no middle ground, and no win. The final show was inevitable, and I knew I had to prepare myself for the ultimate confrontation that would decide the future of my place in this ever. After Derek's threatening private message made his dangerous intentions clear, I stopped waiting for another public incident to happen passively. I knew he would continue targeting me at future gatherings, emboldened by our parents' endless support and convinced he could expose my so-called act. To protect myself and end this cycle of abuse once and for all, I agreed to attend a mandatory family meeting our parents had arranged. They claimed it was meant to heal the divide and settle the drama peacefully, but I knew the truth. They intended to corner me, pressure me into dropping all evidence, and force me to apologize to Derek for splitting the family apart. The meeting took place at my parents' spacious suburban home on a quiet Sunday afternoon. Every core family member was present. My parents, Derek, his wife, and several older aunts and uncles who'd long held neutral ground. From the moment I wheeled into the living room, the atmosphere was thick with judgment. Derek sat confidently on the couch, shoulders relaxed, wearing a smug expression, certain the room would side with him. My parents sat beside him, their body language closed off and cold, already prepared to defend their son no matter what I said. My mother opened the meeting with a rehearsed speech, framing the entire conflict as my fault. She claimed I'd carried unnecessary resentment toward my brother for years, that I'd overblown a harmless reunion push, and that my decision to share private medical records had publicly humiliated the family. My father followed, sternly demanding I extend a full, sincere apology to Derek for tearing the family apart and spreading unproven accusations against his good name. They spoke as if my years of pain, my permanent disability, and their collective mockery had never happened at all. Derek finally spoke up, his tone arrogant and unrepentant. He looked directly at me in my wheelchair, unflinching, and doubled down on every lie he'd ever told. "You've always wanted everyone's sympathy," he said flat. "This disability is just your latest way to... I pushed you because you needed to be snapped out of your fake victim mind, and I'd do it again if I had." His words hung heavy in them, shocking the few relatives who'd hoped for peaceful resolution. Instead of reacting with anger or desperation, I remained calm and I opened my tablet and displayed my full medical history, including every MRI scan result, specialist note, and physical therapy evaluation. I turned the screen toward everyone in the room, letting them read the clear, unalterable truth for themselves. "None of you want to believe this because believing it means you've all participated in me," I said. "It means you laughed at a disabled woman, mocked my chronic pain, and allowed my brother to endanger my life for years, for no reason other than his..." I turned to face my parents, my voice steady but firm. "You two have known I've struggled with mobility and constant pain for years. You've watched me stumble, seen my bruising, and driven me to countless doctor's appointments. Yet you chose to believe my brother's childish lies over your own daughter's lived reality. You chose family harmony over safety, his reputation over dignity, and his pride over..." I then addressed Derek's threat openly, reading his private message aloud for everyone. The room fell completely silent. Even Derek's wife looked uncomfortable, shifting awkwardly. The neutral relatives stood in shock, finally understanding the full severity of the harassment I'd endured. But my brother and my parents refused to budge. My mother immediately defended Derek, claiming his threats were just heated frustration. My father dismissed my evidence as overblown medical technicalities. They refused to acknowledge wrongdoing, unwilling to accept accountability for their... In that tense, silent room, I made my final irreversible. After years of begging for acceptance, fighting for understanding, and clinging to the hope of a family, I looked at the three people who were supposed to protect and love me most, and spoke my final verdict. I will no longer attend family gatherings, participate in family conversations, or subject myself to your abuse. You have all chosen cruelty over kinship, lies over truth, and ego over empathy. I will not spend another day of my life begging for a love. Derek's smug expression shattered instantly. My parents looked stunned, realizing I was no longer the weak, forgiving daughter they could manipulate. They expected tears, apologies, and surrender, but instead they got patient. As I wheeled the front door, leaving their silent guilt behind, I knew the endless cycle of pain was broken. The battle was over. I had lost my family, but I had finally, fully saved myself. I wheeled out of my parents' house that Sunday afternoon without a single glance back, the front door clicking shut behind me and closing the chapter on decades of family devotion. The weight that had settled on my chest for years lifted slowly, replaced by a quiet, unshakable peace I had never known. For so long, I'd defined my worth by their love, clung to their approval, and endured endless cruelty just to keep my place in the family. Walking away, or rather rolling away, was not an act of anger. It was an act of long overdue self-preservation. In the weeks following our final confrontation, the family chaos I'd endured for years slowly faded into silence. With me no longer present to target, Derek had no one left to fuel his toxic narrative. He could no longer paint me as the dramatic, attention-seeking sister, no longer twist my disability into a lie for the family to mock. Without my presence to justify his bitterness, his endless rants and petty accusations fell flat in the group chat. Relatives stopped taking sides, stopped engaging in the drama he tried to stir up, and gradually grew tired of his unnecessary resentment. My parents attempted half-hearted reconciliatory messages a handful of times. They sent short, generic texts asking me to come home for holidays and let the past stay in the past, never once offering a genuine apology, never acknowledging the harm they'd caused. They still refused to admit they'd chosen favoritism over their daughter, ignored my valid suffering, and enabled Derek's dangerous behavior for years. Their only regret was losing the compliant, forgiving version of me they'd grown accustomed to, not the pain they'd inflicted. Derek never reached out with remorse. Occasionally, he'd post vague, passive-aggressive statuses online about ungrateful family members and people who ruin everything, but he never dared address me directly again. He knew the truth was fully exposed, that his years of lies and his violent public shove had been witnessed and documented. Deep down, he understood he could no longer manipulate the family or intimidate me into silence. The power he'd held over my reputation for years was gone for good. Freed from the constant stress of family judgment and gaslighting, my physical and mental health began to improve steadily. My chronic nerve pain did not disappear. My disability was still permanent, and I still relied on my wheelchair for daily life. But the emotional agony that had worsened my symptoms for years finally eased. Without the anxiety of facing mockery at every family event, without the weight of being constantly misunderstood and villainized, my body and mind could finally rest. Dr. Hale noted remarkable progress in my therapy report, telling me letting go of toxic family was the bravest form of healing I could ever do. I rebuilt my life around gentle, genuine joy and unwavering self-respect. I stopped skipping social opportunities out of fear of judgment, stopped shrinking myself to make others comfortable, and stopped apologizing for my disability. I surrounded myself with true friends who saw me fully, who respected my limits, and who never questioned the validity of my. I attended regular physical therapy, invested in small, happy routines, and reclaimed parts of my identity I'd lost while fighting for my family. I learned vital truth here: family is not bound by love requires belief, respect, and none of which my birth family was ever willing. I spent my entire life craving their acceptance, convinced that blood ties should override every hurt and every betrayal. But their consistent cruelty, their choice to mock my disability, and their endless defense of Derek's stupidity prove that some family bonds are not worth saving. Some relationships only drain you, and force you to shrink into a smaller version. Months later, the annual family reunion rolled around. I received no invitation, text, no request from to attend. Derek and my parents hosted the gathering like nothing had happened, laughing and celebrating without a single thought for the daughter and sister they abandoned. For the first time in my life, I did not feel sad, left out. Grateful to be free of judgment, free of lies, and free of the endless cycle of pain they'd trapped me in. I no longer grieve the family. I celebrate the strong, unbreakable woman I've become. I lost a brother who chose cruelty, parents who chose favoritism, and a family that chose lies over truth. But I gained my freedom, my peace, and my self-worth. My disability is permanent, but my suffering at the hands of my family is finally over. I did not lose everything when I walked away. I finally gained myself.